meeting number 33 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Official Languages. Pursuant to the order of reference of Monday, May 30, 2022, the committee resumes consideration of Bill C-13, an act to amend the Official Languages Act to enact the use of French in federally regulated private businesses Act and to make related amendments to other acts. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. Pursuant to the order of the House adopted on Thursday, June 23, 2022, members may participate in person or via the Zoom application. To ensure that the meeting runs smoothly, I would like to give some instructions to witnesses and members. Before you speak, please wait for me to recognize you by name. If you are participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your microphone, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. As far as interpretation is concerned, for those who are on Zoom, you have a choice at the bottom of your screen between Floor, English, and or French. For those who are in the room, you can use the earpiece and choose the desired channel. I remind you that all comments from members and witnesses should be addressed to the chair. For those members present in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk of the committee and I will do our best to keep the speaking order, and we thank you for your patience and understanding in this regard. In accordance with our routine motion, I'd like to inform the committee that all witnesses have completed the required connection tests prior to the meeting. I would like to now welcome our witnesses for the first panel. We have the Office of the Commissioner of Official Languages, so welcome Mr. Raymond Théberge, Commissioner of Official Languages, who will be accompanied by Ms. Isabelle Gervais, Assistant Commissioner, Compliance Assurance Branch, and Mr. Pierre Leduc, Assistant Commissioner, Policy and Communications Branch, and Ms. Pascale Giguère, General Counsel, Legal Affairs Branch. As you know, Mr. Théberge, as is customary, we are giving you 5 minutes for your presentation. We are very strict about it. With that, the floor is yours. Mr. Chair, distinguished members, honorable members of the committee, good morning. First, I would like to acknowledge that the land on which we are gathered is part of the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people and indigenous people of the Ottawa Valley. I'm very pleased to be with you today to present the results of my in-depth analysis of the government's proposed measures in Bill C-13. In my brief entitled Seizing a Historic Opportunity for a Complete Modernization of the OLA, I explain my position and make a series of recommendations to strengthen Bill C-13. If passed, this bill has the potential to transform Canada's language policy in order to advance our official languages and to better defend the language rights of Canadians. The time to modernize the Act is long past due. The most recent language data from the 2021 census clearly shows this. There's a decline in the demographic weight of Francophones relative to that of English speakers, and this is a major concern, and we have to act.
There are some measures in it that could be improved and clarified. And there are other measures that are not included in the bill that I think should be added. Here are a few examples. C-13 does not include any measures to modernize the core components of the Act: communications with and services to the public, and language of work. As I point out in my brief, this omission is one of the weak points in the bill. I believe that federal institutions' obligations in terms of language of work and communications with the public also need to be better aligned. Let's take the example of a federal public servant who holds a bilingual position in a unilingual work area. Currently, he or she must serve the public in both official languages, but does not have access to work tools and supervision in the language of his or her choice. The Act must ensure that the work tools in both official languages are available so they can provide quality service to the public. Le projet de loi C-13 devrait aussi...
I also think that Bill C-13 should enshrine in the Act a duty for federal institutions to draft all federal, provincial, territorial agreements in both official languages, and to include enforceable language clauses in these agreements. However, although the bill proposes to strengthen federal institutions' responsibilities to take positive measures, these obligations are still discretionary and do not fully reflect the Federal Court of Appeal's recent decision. Another aspect of the bill that could benefit from some fine-tuning are the measures to improve governance, meaning the way the federal government ensures that the Act is implemented effectively. I strongly believe that the Act would be greatly improved if responsibility for its governance were assigned to a central agency that had the authority and legitimacy to strengthen accountability mechanisms and to ensure federal institutions' compliance.
The Court of Canada is in the best position to assume this important responsibility. There is considerable overlap in Bill C-13 between the Treasury Board's responsibilities and those of Canadian Heritage. This results in two separate entities being responsible for the implementation of the Act, which is problematic when trying to determine who has the final say. I am, however, very pleased that the government is giving more teeth to the Act by granting me a variety of more binding compliance mechanisms, such as the power to impose monetary penalties, enter into compliance agreements, and make orders. The addition of the power to impose administrative monetary penalties to Crown corporations and other entities operating in the transportation sector that do not meet their language obligations is a step in the right direction. However, the scope of this provision is too narrow, which greatly diminishes the potential to also change behaviors elsewhere within the government. Je recommande donc d'élargir.
I am therefore recommending that the power to impose administrative monetary penalties be expanded to apply to all federal institutions with obligations related to language of work and services to the public. At the very least, these penalties should apply to businesses that are subject to the use of French in Federally Regulated Private Businesses Act. Adding new powers to my toolbox will undoubtedly help me better ensure compliance with the Act. However, it will require the allocation of additional financial and human resources to my office. In fact, the volume of complaints we receive has risen significantly over the past few years. This makes for a sometimes difficult work environment for my team of investigators, which adds a certain amount of pressure on them. It is therefore crucial that our resources be adapted to this new reality and to our new powers so that we can continue to protect Canadians' language rights effectively.
Consideration of Bill C-13 brings us one step closer to the finish line. However, there are still a number of stages to go before it is passed. The ball is now in your court, and I urge you to seize the historic opportunity before you today to make this bill a success for Canada's official languages. Thank you for your attention, and I will be very happy to answer your questions in the official language of your choice.
Merci, Monsieur le Commissaire.
Thank you, Commissioner. As is customary, as you know, the first round of questions will be 6 minutes for each political party. So we will start the first round with the first Vice President of the Vice Chair of the Committee, Mr. Joel Godin. You have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Commissioner, for being here. It's always a pleasure to have you here in committee. You talked towards the end of your speech about this law, the modernization of this law being a historical opportunity. So my question is this: should we do this quickly, or do we owe it ourselves to do this thoroughly? Well, we have undertaken a lot of work over the recent years, be it at the parliamentary committee level or within different communities with different stakeholders. There have been many reports that have been drafted, submitted, prepared. So I think we are at a point in time that we need to spring into action. And in the brief that I submitted to the committee, I proposed some amendments, some modifications. But it is important, I think, to not forget that C-13 is an improvement on C-31, which was an improvement over the law, the Act as it exists today. So I think it is now time to act. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner, we do agree. We have to take action, and we are taking action at the moment. But we have to take the time and make sure that we are improving upon what has been done, what was done in the past, and we have a common objective. You also mentioned in your speech that the governance of the law will be greatly improved if the responsibility is given to one organization, and you are pointing to the Treasury Board. So, in your opinion, is this a must condition for the efficiency of the of Bill C-13? It is very important to have a structure to make sure that the implementation is done in the best manner. My question, Commissioner, is this a must condition for the effective implementation of the bill? Yes, the implementation has to be effective and has to have an impact. Is this a must condition? There has to be an impact, so you don't want to respond, but I am reading between the lines and I get your point. Thank you very much. So, we have limited time. That is why I try to go quickly. I'm sure you will understand. But I'd like to hear your opinions on the following as well. The implementation of Bill C-13 with the improvements you proposed, your recommendations, will it stop the decline of French the very next day? Yes, we looked at the results to come from the last census, but these are not the only indicators because we've had these for a long time. There's been an increase in the decline of French. Are we then going to be able to stop the decline of French with this bill in Quebec and everywhere else in Canada? I think if we don't do anything, the decline will continue. I think the bill, as proposed, or maybe as amended, will certainly help to either slow down or reverse the decline of French in Canada. So the bill has to be also seen in light of other levers of action that, available to the government. So we, as the Conservative Party, we have three objectives. Stop the decline of the French language, which is the only language that is declining, and also to protect and promote the official languages until the time comes that we decide Canada is a country with a single language, unilingual country. But will this bill stop the decline of French the very next day? The very next day, I'm not very sure, but it will help. Thank you. Another question. So now you have certain powers as the commissioner, and I think you have to have more powers. I fully agree with what you suggested. But let me put you in a specific context. An airport in Regina that is taking steps to find employees who are bilingual and who prove it to you or to the Treasury Board or Canadian Heritage or elsewhere. I don't know where the presentation will have to be made, but the organization is not able to find employees who would be able to answer demands of clients in French. Do we close down the airport? Well, I think we have to have the necessary infrastructure in place to make sure that we can develop a bilingual workforce. This might be through the education system, primary, secondary, post-secondary. We have to have the means to offer this language training to create this bilingual workforce. And I assure you that there is a significant need for bilingual workforce in Canada. There is an urgent workforce or labor shortage, but bilingual, yes, that's another layer on top of it. But my question, do we shut it down? Do we give them a deadline? Do we give them, provide an exception? Well, we can conclude a compliance agreement with the institution in question. We can set out a deadline so that they get to compliance as set out in the law. In the Act, as you mentioned right now, it doesn't exist. Yes, right now we only make recommendations. When it comes to the linguistic clauses, language clauses, you say that we have to have language clauses. I fully agree with you because if the federal government is not able to ensure conformity with both official languages, who will be able to do it? Of course, this has to be in the Act and the bill to include language clauses. But my question right now is the following. We should not be stepping into provincial and territorial jurisdiction. So how can we include language clauses in the agreements, federal, provincial, territorial agreements, without violating the jurisdiction of provinces? Well, excellent question. We would need to come back to it later on. I had a good answer to excellent question, Mr. Godin. but you know that I'm strict with the timing so that everyone gets to enjoy the same opportunity. So the next round will go to our Parliamentary Secretary for Official Languages, Mr. Serret. You have the floor for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Commissioner, for being here with us. And as a Franco-Ontarian, I also would like to thank you for the work you did in the past. So you were talking about the adoption of C13 as quickly as possible. We can do a clause-by-clause evaluation. We can go into the recommendations that you brought to us. We have Michel Pastorage, Linda Cardinal, Michel Doucette, Rémi Léger, Benoît Pelletier, Martin Normand, Cédric Doucette. These people are also saying that it is now time to take action. So as you were saying, we talked about C31, but you talked about the importance of adopting C13 to enrich and support the action plan. Can you go into a bit more detail on that point? In our brief, we talk about the importance of having a pan-governmental plan to support the development of official language communities in minority situations. So how do we develop this plan? Who will be in charge? Canadian Heritage has done tremendous work to reach out to communities. What we're proposing is not taking anything away from the work they have been doing when it comes to consultations and so on and so forth. But I think from the very get-go, we have to have the best structure in place to ensure a good implementation of the Act. You mentioned Michel Doucette. He is saying that the Act is the least respected act in the history of Canada, the Official Languages Act. There have been some violations and complaints, but from the get-go, we have to give ourselves the right structures so that the implementation goes smoothly, because you can have the best bill, but if you're not successful with its implementation, then we are not going to obtain the results that we're looking for.
Thank you very much. You were very clear when answering my colleague earlier, and I asked the question back in March as well. Should the Official Languages Act have more teeth? Your answer was that C13 needed to get kicked off as quickly as possible, and then we could get into clause by clause later. Is that still your belief? Certainly. As I said earlier, there have been extensive studies and consultations carried out on C13. This is a bill that has been in development for a few years now. Could we continue to amend it and modify it? Certainly. But really, the time has come to act. If C13 is not passed, the OQLF sent a letter to federally regulated private businesses in Quebec discussing the Quebec Charter of the French language. If C13 is not passed, are you concerned about the role of provinces who might leap into the arena and pass their own bills, not necessarily bills which will be good for minority francophones? I think you're talking largely about FRPBs. Each province, of course, can develop its own policies. But when we're talking about the use of French Act, it would establish two linguistic regimes, and that could lead to some confusion among both businesses and the public. I think it is very important that the government clarify who is responsible for what. Regarding immigration targets, the government is working hard to meet its immigration targets, which they have not met to date. Do you have any idea of what the targets ought to be? This is an issue touching the action plan, C13, and also regulations. I'm going to leave that to the demographers. I will say that the current target of 4.4% is not enough. It's not enough to maintain the demographic weight of Francophones, and it's certainly not enough to increase it. What should the minimum be? Double? Even more? That's a question for specialists. They would be best placed to determine the proper targets. A target of 12% has been raised. But what is clear is that if we are unable to maintain the demographic weight of Francophone OLMCs, linguistic duality will be threatened. I only have 30 seconds. Mr. Doucette gave a presentation at a summit regarding the Treasury Board. And he actually supported the bill as currently written. Are you aware of Mr. Doucette's remarks? Do you mean Mr. Savoy? Oh, yes, Mr. Savoy. Thank you. Oh, he's good. He's good. 10 seconds. I greatly appreciated the comments by Mr. Savoy. But he wasn't entirely in agreement due to the 2008 changes. Thank you, Commissioner. I would have liked to let you continue, but I need to be quite strict so that everyone has the chance to ask questions. My apologies, it's my job. The next 6-minute round will go to Mr. Mario Beaulieu, the second Vice Chair. Hello, Commissioner. And hello to your staff as well. 2 years ago, the federal government underwent a sort of paradigm shift. They started recognizing that Quebecers are part of a Francophone minority in Canada and in North America, and the federal government recognized this responsibility to protect the French language in Quebec. C-13 brings up the entire question of federally regulated private businesses, which I think is more of a step backwards than a step forward. Aside from those measures, what measures in C-13 will help to stem the decline of French in Quebec? There are a few provisions in the bill that touch on important files. Part 7 is one of them. Part 7 gives some flexibility to federal institutions, but what there is a need for is positive measures. Federal institutions need to act in order to protect and promote French. And then there's the recognition of the fact that Quebec is part of a national minority. That is an extremely important step in the right direction. Canada's francophonie is a minority surrounded by an English-speaking ocean. That's true. You spoke of positive measures. In C-13, positive measures are not clarified. On one hand, the federal government is recognizing, as requested by, the Quebec government has asked the federal government to recognize that there is one official language in Quebec. What did the federal government do? It recognized that French is in general a minority at the national level. There's maybe one section of the bill that is more specific, but the bill continues to recognize that Anglophones represent a minority within Quebec. So the government is saying two contradictory things. What needs to change in your view? What needs to change to stem the decline of French? That is, the ball is in the court of federal institutions, IRCC, whichever department, any department. The federal government needs to promote French both inside and outside Quebec. There is an obligation to act. The federal government is required to promote French. This obligation applies to all federal institutions. So the issue is that Part 7 is not especially clear. For you, what would be the definition of a positive measure that helps to defend French? Just give me an example. Education would be one important element, ensuring there is enough funding for education in French from primary school to secondary school and beyond. People need to be able to access high-quality education in the language of their choice. Another important point would be to ensure that federal institutions in Quebec and in designated bilingual regions offer French language services. Well, it's right now, Anglophone establishments are overfunded. This has been the case for a long time. All sorts of federal funds are being drained away into Anglophone establishments. And the government is proposing to continue on this path. As I said earlier, how I think of the bill and how I think of the intention of the legislator is a bill to find new ways to protect French. As for actions, that is up to the government. There's a whole issue of by and for. The Quebec government has set out a series of very specific requests for Bill C-13. Nothing made its way into the version of the bill before the committee. 90% of Francophones in Canada are in Quebec. The decline is growing worse. There's language transfer towards English. And you think this bill needs to be passed? What do you think will happen in Quebec? I believe that the bill, as written, and with certain amendments that have been proposed, will help. The intention of the legislator is to protect and promote French. This is the first time that language has been used in official language policies. 20 seconds, Mr. Beaulieu. Well, I'll need to bring up problems facing your office. We know that there's a lot of work on your plate. Now over to Manitoba. Ms. Ashton, 6 minutes. Thank you very much. Greetings to the Commissioner. My first question concerns language clauses. In your brief, you talk about the need to include binding language clauses in the bill. This has come up quite frequently at the committee. This is a historic opportunity to protect French language services. You have stated that FPT agreements without language clauses could have a negative impact on Francophone OLMCs. Can you give a few examples of this? Well, one agreement that did have language clauses were the child care agreements. There were language clauses in the 27 agreements, but when you look at the $10 a day daycare agreement in 2021, those agreements did not have language clauses. So one might wonder what will be the impact of official language minority communities. Will they have the funding and daycare spaces they need? What will be the long-term impacts? Historically, there have also been difficulties with education agreements. We've received complaints about that at my office. We've heard about funds not reaching OLMC schools. So there have been situations in the past where the lack of language clauses gives too much leeway to provinces and territories to use funds as they wish rather than as they are intended. Thank you very much. In your opening remarks, you talked about positive measures as written in the Act are a step in the right direction. but they do not implement all the findings of the FFCB case. Could you distinguish between positive measures and binding language clauses? And can you talk about why the bill does not go far enough to implement the appeal court decision? Federal institutions have a lot of discretion when it comes to which measures they turn to. The FFCB criteria are much stricter than what is in the current Act. The current Act gives a lot of leeway to federal institutions. I think this flexibility should be refined through regulations. In the FFCB case, the court not only recognized the importance of positive measures and federal institutions obligations, but it recognized the need for action as well, and that's the most important component. There needs to be impact assessments carried out to ensure that positive measures actually serve communities on the ground. So that sort of mechanism needs to be written into a regulation so that the federal government doesn't accidentally negatively impact OLMCs. My next question is regarding the powers of the Treasury Board. In your brief, you talked about how the Treasury Board's powers should be increased so that they could ensure the implementation of the OLA across government departments. Could you say a few words about the importance of this recommendation? As I said earlier, we need to set up a structure that will ensure solid governance and an effective implementation of the Act. There are very few government institutions that can look across the entire governmental apparatus. The Treasury Board is one of them. They're being put in charge of Parts 4 and 5. And C-13 did strengthen the Treasury Board's requirements. A number of departments simply are not able to oversee other departments. So there does need to be an agency that could set out an accountability framework which would ensure federal institutions respect their official language obligations. Finally, with 1 minute to go, regarding immigration, is it important to write a remedial purpose for immigration into the Act? In our brief, we talk about maintaining and improving. So regarding remedial objectives, the long-term goal needs to be not just the maintenance of the current demographic weight of Francophones, but the increase of the demographic weight so that it goes back to where it was previously. 20 seconds left. Commissioner, you're so efficient. Well, I would just like to thank you for your concise points you have made and for your strong recommendations. We need to take your expertise seriously. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Ashton. We will now begin the second round of questions. We will start with Bernard Généreux. 5 minutes. Over to you. Thank you, Chair. And Commissioner, thank you for coming before us. Thank you to your colleagues as well. Now, my colleague, Mr. Godin, was asking a very good question about binding clauses. I was wondering if you could provide your answer to his question. As I was saying, it's important to note that there have been FPT agreements with language clauses, so this is not a new issue. It represents a strong message from the federal government to the provinces concerning the importance of official languages. FPT agreements should also be written in both official languages. That is a strong signal from the federal government. And the needs of OLMCs must be centered. Without language clauses, OLMCs can fall through the gaps when it comes to implementing the clause. So you think there should be binding clauses? Certainly. Regarding transportation, in your brief, you talk about expanded power to issue fines. You talk about expanding this power to other federal institutions. We know Air Canada is currently subject to the OLA. Other carriers are not. Do you believe that other carriers should be subject to the Official Languages Act? Currently, Air Canada is the only carrier subject to the Official Languages Act. If C-13 is passed, the Use of French Act will apply to carriers like WestJet, but their obligations won't be exactly the same because they'll be under the UFA and not the OLA. Regarding AMP's administrative monetary penalties, I believe their use should be expanded, especially regarding federally regulated private businesses. I think their usage as written is too limited. You've talked about transportation, and yeah, there's airlines, but currently there are people who are not subject to the act who should be. Did you any chance to discuss this bill with the government of Quebec? No, I didn't. So you had no communications with the Quebec government. Would it be important for you as the defender of the OLA that you sit down with the Quebec government and talk about their demands? I believe that discussion to take place on a different level, at the political level. I see. In your brief, you set out over about 24 amendments. We all know that the Official Languages Act should be changed. It hasn't been changed for 50 years. We have a historic opportunity before us. With the amendments you're proposing, and as my colleague noted, we do want to pass the bill quickly, but we want to pass it well. We've had 50 years of reports on the implementation of the OLA, and the impression we get is that the current act can be modified in many ways, but what we hear the most is the need for the Treasury Board to be in charge. There's almost unanimity, but the federal government seems to be dragging its feet. Do you not think that there should be a captain at the helm?
I think in our brief we made a very clear point. What we're proposing is that the Treasury Board has to be the central agency, and I think this was also taken up by other shareholders or other witnesses in previous sessions, meetings. So we do leave it to the government, of course, to decide how to organize this all. But one observation would be that for the last 50 years, what has been missing in a way has been this guardianship of the Official Languages Act. It has changed throughout the years. Before 2008, there was one way of doing things, and then it changed. Thank you very much, Commissioner. We will have to continue. You might be able to continue as questions are asked and go into detail, but for the next 5-minute round, we will have Ms. Kayabaga. You have the floor for 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello, Commissioner. Thank you for appearing before us and sharing your expertise with us on Bill C-13. And you are making a very clear point that we have to move forward and do that quickly. Some comments have been made to point out that we need to wait and spend more time, but we need to, of course, carry out consultations. and we have to find out ways of improving what has been proposed by the government to respond to the needs of French speakers all across Canada. So my first question to you is going to be the following. Can we do two things at the same time while advancing in certain aspects and then stopping the decline of French that we see in Canada, but at the same time also enrich this bill so that the modifications continue to be made with work from all sides and people like yourself? But we have to move forward. We have to take action. Your comments pointed to this as well. You were saying that this needs to be done quickly. This is very important for official language minority communities, especially French speakers. So what would your comment on that be? Well, I assumed this responsibility in 2018. Now we're in 2022, soon 2023. So we were talking about modernization before I took up this post. Since I've been at this post, we keep talking about this. There have been several rounds of consultations, a lot of witnesses appeared before parliamentary committees. And I think we are at a point in time when your role is to take all this into account, all of this information, and to see how the bill can be improved, the bill that is before us. I think all stakeholders agree on the fact that it is now time to take action. In this bill, though, we should give ourselves the possibility of reviewing the bill or the act in 5 to 10 years, not 50 years. So we should give ourselves the option of making adjustments as we go. If we wait for the perfect bill, then we will never attain that objective. So if we keep waiting, we're not getting anything done. But if we move forward, we will make some improvements. So in C13, with 13, we can come back and review the law, and this will be a novelty. This was not done before. So with the act that we have, the acts or the measures that are in place for federal institutions, what do you think is missing? What can be added? The only real power of the Commissioner has been to issue recommendations. With the bill, there is a range of powers, so issuing orders, administrative and monetary fines, coming to enforceable agreements, mediation. So there are tools in the bill that will allow us to resolve situations quickly rather than always carry out a study and then follow that up with recommendations. So we will have options. Right now, there isn't much in our toolkit. We also should seek ways of applying administrative monetary penalties in a wider framework, if you will. It's just one tool in our toolbox. We can, of course, raise awareness among federal institutions. We can think about enforceable agreements, orders, or administrative monetary penalties. So what is proposed is actually a well-equipped toolkit for the Commissioner for the next 5 years or so. Thank you, Commissioner. The next round will be Mr. Beaulieu, 2 minutes and 30 seconds. You have the floor. C13, it's not that it's not perfect, but it doesn't have the minimum of minimums, if you will, to help French in Quebec. there is no demands of the Quebec government that has been taken into account. There was a study by Radio-Canada saying that 70% of federal positions in Quebec required knowledge of English, but outside of Quebec, only 13% of posts require the candidates to speak French. I think in the regions, the positions should reflect the language realities of that location. And about 42% of positions in federal government are designated as bilingual, and then 58% as English essential, and I think 6% only French essential. So there is some things to be done. So I think it's essentially only in Quebec that this emphasis is placed. In government agencies, I will not name names. I do have concrete examples, but people are talking about reprisals. So some federal agencies, they say that if you want to be served in French, select 1, or for English, select 2, but it's just to apply to all employees. Unilingual French employees might end up losing their jobs. What do you think about this? In unilingual designated regions, as a language of work, people should be able to supervise and should be able to work in their language of choice. I'm not really aware of what you just mentioned. We've never received complaints about this, but it would be a shame if it is indeed the case. We will see. 20 seconds, Mr. Beaulieu. Do you think you have sufficient resources to take care of all complaints? Well, two things. First, we have a shortage of employees. Apologies, Commissioner. We will have to continue with the next speaker. 2 minutes and 30 seconds for Ms. Ashton. You have the floor. Okay, thank you. Well, first off, I have a comment. There's something I find interesting. We have been hearing from Liberals now for multiple times that even though we consider the decline of French as a serious subject, even though we are looking into this bill at the committee level, that we should ignore the recommendations that are coming from key witnesses, and we have to push forward and continue, move ahead as is. I think we have a responsibility of doing our job in an efficient way as parliamentarians, and we have to also show respect to multiple witnesses who have told us clearly that the bill needs to be improved. We have to recognize the context in which we are working. The French is declining. We know numbers are shocking all across the country. So my question to you, Commissioner, is do you think that the bill has to be improved? Do you think that will we be able to better slow down or reverse the decline of French with enforceable clauses or with better targets or better measures when it comes to immigration? These are all important elements in the bill. They can all have an impact on the decline of French. Immigration is a must, of course, in all this. Without increasing the French-speaking immigration targets outside of Quebec, it is clear that the decline will continue. We also have to make sure that we establish education systems starting from early childhood up until post-secondary, focusing on languages on the one hand, but then, of course, focusing on high-quality French as a second language programs all across the country again. So it is very important for me that when there are federal-provincial agreements with programs delivered by the provinces that affect communities, we have to make sure that the communities in question are respected within the framework of these agreements, that their needs are respected. This is an important element. Also, as I was saying about education, we have to be able to determine the right holders as defined by Article 23 of the Charter, and Part 7, once it's Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Commissioner. We went, I think, beyond our time, but we might be able to come back to some of these points. We still have time to finish the second round. I will shorten it down to 4 minutes. So, Mr. Gourde, you have 4 minutes. Mr. Taberge. What do you think would be a successful opportunity that we seize? What would be an opportunity we miss, or what will be a nightmare scenario? Well, the bill, if it is not adopted, then we are stuck with what we already have. So what would be a success is the following. If we have key elements. One, governance that ensures horizontal coordination across the federal apparatus for the implementation of the Act. And then secondly, Part 7 that is well developed and codified, because Part 7 affects communities the most. We should also focus on the language of work as an issue, because in a quickly changing working environment, this is an important element. What would be a so-so outcome would be adopting Bill C-13 as is. I think there are elements that can be improved, especially when it comes to governance, when it comes to Part 7. But I think the elements are all there to come up with a good bill. We talked about a review in 10 years. Would you not prefer 5 years instead? Well, I will leave this to parliamentarians to decide. There are parts of the Act that will not be implemented before 2-3 years. So by the 5-year mark, how would we be able to measure the impact? But we have to monitor the implementation. When it comes to immigration, for instance, are we reaching the targets? Did we fix the targets, determine the targets? Are we taking the steps to reach these objectives? So there are specific elements that we can follow along the implementation of the bill or the act. I think after 10 years, we will be in a good position to see what has been the global impact of this. What do we need to adjust? Mr. Taberge, in your brief, you say in order to ensure efficient accountability, then the Treasury Board should be made the central agency in charge of the implementation of the bill. Can you go in more detail on that? Well, we are looking at an accountability framework. So what are the rules that federal institutions are supposed to follow to show that they are respecting their official language's obligations? And this framework does not exist at the moment. Mr. Taberge, do we need to codify the Thibodeau petition or some of its aspects and integrate into the Official Languages Act? Yes, I think this is very important. Airport authorities or institutions tend to have a very, very limited definition of traveling public. And now that decision has been appealed. So I think we need to expand the concept of traveling public. Mr. Taberge, if we need to amend 30 seconds to update bilingual regions, I did not understand your question. For the list of bilingual regions, should it be updated on a cyclical basis? I think the Bilingual Bureau is not really following the reality, because we have had this system for 40 years, bilingual regions, and there have been tremendous population changes over the past 40 years. So I think we have to update that too. Yes, thank you, Commissioner. And now we're going to finish this round with Mr. Drouin. You have the floor for 4 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Commissioner, for always taking the time to appear before us, and your work is very important, not just for my community, my French-speaking community, but for all Francophone communities across Canada. I have the chance, the opportunity of representing many federal employees, and Mr. Gourd was making a point. When a person is doing a bilingual job in a completely English-speaking environment, how do you think we can legislate on that? But in practical terms, how do we apply the act, implement the act? There's a very practical aspect to this. If you want to be able to work in the language of your choice, you have to have the tools. Right now, we don't always have the tools. We don't always have the necessary training. What is interesting is that, in fact, everything is available in both languages centrally, if you will, but in the regions, that's not always the case. Tools are missing. So in the bill, I think these sorts of elements could be added. Tools, training, services that are being received from the center, if you will, in the official language of one's choice. And these options are already available in both languages, but in a more centralized way. When it comes to delivering services, government services in French, well, this happens in Ottawa. The majority of Francophones 15, 20, 30 years ago, they were to the east of Ottawa, but right now they are all across Ottawa. Of course, it's a lot easier to talk about Ottawa, but in the regions where the numbers justify the delivery of French services, but the population is dispersed all across, how do we deal with these situations? We keep hearing about this. I'm not going to engage in Quebec bashing. This is not it. But when there are 100 Francophones in a small region offering services in French, how do you think we can bring together these two elements and continue these services? There are geographical issues at play here. Well, there has to be better alignment between the office offering services and where you find French speakers. You are right, there have been significant demographic changes. When I was a student at University of Ottawa, there were villages that are now cities. They were not French-speaking, but now there you find in these places French schools. So we have to find out where French speakers are, but we have to also not forget that the populations are moving in time. So we cannot take away services from a population to provide them to another population. We have to just expand the delivery of services.
Then there's this whole question of positive measures. They're somewhat defined in C13, but should we not go further? Should we define them clearly within the bill, or would it be fine to define them through regulations without going through the legal process, the legislative process rather, because that can take a good while? In your view, should we address positive measures through regulations? In just a few seconds. Regulations, or rather, some elements of recent court rulings should be written into the bill, but as for the implementation of the bill, you need regulations. That's how you implement the various parts of the Act, like Part 7. That's how things are carried out. So, yes, write some things into the Act, but, Chair, point of privilege. I'd like unanimous consent to invite the Commissioner back for another hour. Would that be possible? Do I have unanimous consent? Point of order. There's nothing preventing you from adding the Commissioner to your witness list. Yeah, but I'd like to address this right away. A point of order, Chair. My colleague, Mr. Liu, asked a question. Do we have unanimous consent? I would like to answer that. I would like to hear the other participants. Could we get the question again? It's not a motion. It's a point of privilege. Chair, He's asking for unanimous consent. Could the committee perhaps make a decision? We're going to suspend. I'm going to speak to the chair. Again, this is a point of privilege, not a motion. We will suspend briefly. I will get back. To order, colleagues. Please be seated. Commissioner Theberge. Can everyone hear me? Clerk? Can you hear me? All right. Commissioner Theberge. There's not a ton of time. If you wish to provide any additional information, please send it in writing to our chair. As for you, Mr. Lew, your point of privilege is not really a point of privilege. So I reject the point of privilege. We're going to suspend again and come back with the second panel. Thank you, Chair. The meeting is called back to order. I would just like to make a few points before we get into the second panel. First, before speaking, wait for me to call on you. If you are participating virtually, click on the microphone icon to turn your mic on. When you are not speaking, put yourself on mute. Regarding interpretation, those on Zoom have the choice to listen to floor audio, French or English. Those of you in the room, of course, can use the provided headsets and choose the desired channel. Please speak through the chair at all times. Witnesses will each have 5 minutes shared in certain cases to make their opening remarks. Then we will move on to question and answers. I'd like to welcome our new witnesses. For the second panel, Houston Rifai, Public Policy and Administration student at the with the Bishops Forum, and Ariel Wharton, sociology student, also part of Bishops Forum. Finally, we have Guillaume Rousseau from the Université de Sherbrooke Law Faculty. We will start with 5 shared minutes with Mr. Rifai and Ms. Wharton. Over to you, 5 minutes.
Mr. Arsenault and members of the committee. I am Ariel Wharton, an English-speaking Quebecer currently attending Concordia University in my 3rd year of sociology. Attending with me today, fellow English-speaking Quebecer, Houston Rifai, who will introduce himself shortly. We represent a group of young English-speaking leaders who have attended the Bishops Forum. The Bishops Forum is an initiative supported by the Government of Quebec's Secrétariat aux relations avec les Québécois d'expression anglaise. Nous sommes ici aujourd'hui pour partager nos points.
We are here to share our views on C13, which will have a great impact on young Quebec Anglophones. We grew up as members of a language minority, but one that wishes to continue building our lives in Quebec. We are bilingual, bicultural, and we would like to have the opportunity to contribute to Canadian and Quebec society.
To make a few points regarding C13. Over the past 5 years, public discourse surrounding our official languages has gone from a collaborative, positive discussion to a divisive exercise pitting English and French against each other. Official language rights are now being played in a zero-sum environment, which is ignoring the very real changes faced by the English-speaking Quebecers. C13 proposes to include specific mentions of the Charter of the French language within Canada's Official Languages Act. We remind you that as amended by Bill 96, the Charter of the French language operates notwithstanding the fundamental rights and freedoms of Quebecers. C13 proposes to create new language rights for Francophones only with respect to their communications with federally regulated businesses, effectively creating special rights for a majority population instead of a minority population. As young English-speaking Quebecers, we feel abandoned by the federal government in this proposal. We are concerned that C13's emphasis on the protection and promotion of French threatens the duty of the federal institutions to take positive measures to enhance the vitality of the English-speaking community of Quebec. Thank you, and we will now hear from Houston Rifai.
Thank you to my colleague. As mentioned before, my name is Houston Rifai. I am active both in social movements and as a student and worker here in Quebec. I'm here to share my concerns and the concerns of many young English-speaking Quebecers about Bill C13. I do so while fully supporting the elements of the legislation aimed at bolstering minority language communities across Canada, but seemingly not here in Quebec. Everyone here agrees that there's a need to protect and promote French, the French language in Canada as a whole, particularly where it is in decline. However, French can be promoted and protected in a positive way without having to suppress the use of other minority languages to achieve this objective. Quebec's English-speaking community is not a threat to French in Quebec. More people speak French inside Quebec than ever before. More young Anglophones are bilingual than any community other than Francophones outside of Quebec. As English-speaking Quebecers, we have put in the work to live and learn in French. And our language communities therefore constitute a distinct population from the rest of Canada, just as Francophones do in Ontario and New Brunswick. The notion that French is threatened in Quebec often relies on mother tongue indicators and the language that people speak in the privacy of their own homes and with their families. This exclusionary framing is part of a wider fear-based narrative, which has been reflected in legislation and rhetoric from our political leadership. Just these past few weeks, we've heard from members of our government in Quebec words of contempt towards minority communities, and fear-mongering against minorities as a threat to the majority. The sentiments of exclusion were echoed by a member of the House of Commons who stated that the idea that protecting English in Quebec makes absolutely no sense, which the current version of Bill C-13 appears to take to heart. We propose that protecting the rights of minority languages and minority communities is always good sense, and we ask that you consider protecting the rights of English-speaking Quebecers as a minority within their own context, just as we ask for the rights of Francophone Ontarians and Acadians to be respected and upheld in this legislation. We ask that our government take an active stance, active stance against the reduction of rights as seen in anti-charter legislation such as Bill 96 and Bill 21. We implore that you do not make reference to the Charter of the French Language in the Official Languages Act, as we feel that this will allow for more exclusionary and pernicious elements within our political culture to hold sway over federal language policy. Thank you, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Rifai. Mrs. Wharton, I'm so glad for once I hear witnesses that talks as fast as me in French, but take your time for the interpret that they can do their job properly. You can speak slowly. Nous allons maintenant.
We will now hear from Mr. Rousseau. 5 minutes. Over to you, Mr. Rousseau. Hello, and thank you for this invitation to come before you today to talk about Bill C-13. Greetings to Mr. Beaulieu, whom I know, and also greetings to Elizabeth Briere, the member for Sherbrooke. I'd like to talk about the two main notions of how to regulate languages, the territorial principle and the personality principle, where under the personality principle, people are able to choose in which language they receive state services. My research has shown that the research is clear, practically unanimous, regarding the territorial approach. Only the territorial approach can protect a minority language. Quebec has only one official language, but the federal government now needs to bring itself in line with the territorial-based Quebec principles. We could look to Switzerland, which does apply the territoriality principle. Between 1970 and 2017, the Francophone proportion of the population rose by 4.5% from 18.4% to 22.9%. That's what happens under the territoriality principle. In Canada, over the same period, the population declined from 25% to 20%, so a 5% decrease. Of course, there were other factors at play, but language policy models played a major role. I have been studying C-13. In my view, C-13 needs to bring Canada more towards territoriality with greater protections for French within Quebec. This, of course, does not prevent Canada from applying the personality principle outside Quebec. But the territoriality principle protects vulnerable languages where the majority language is not vulnerable, then the personality principle is fine, so it could apply in other provinces. That is not a problem. English does not require the territoriality principle for its protection. Another major principle is the principle of asymmetry. I believe that the government needs to stop treating Anglophones in Quebec and Francophones outside Quebec as the same. We have seen that French is in decline throughout Canada, including in Quebec. English is not in decline. So asymmetry needs to take precedence. Parts of the bill do take a more asymmetric approach, but we need to strengthen the bill and bring it more towards an asymmetric approach so that more can be done for French in Quebec and also the other provinces. One example would be the reference to, I think it's Section 41(6)(c). The bill talks about the importance of OLMC educational institutions. So Francophone and Anglophone OLMCs are being treated as equal. What does this mean? English OLMC post-secondary institutions will be overfunded Francophone Quebec institutions will be underfunded. This is an issue that speaks to me as an academic. Under this bill, English language university research will be overfunded, French language university research will be underfunded. And I believe this is something that C13 needs to correct. We could also talk more about asymmetry and territoriality. Now, C13 brings up the use of French in Federally Regulated Private Businesses Act. This is in line with the territoriality principle because it protects the use of French in private businesses in Quebec and in regions with a strong Francophone presence. That is in line with the territorial approach, and it could actually allow for French to be protected. The thing is, the use of French in Federally Regulated Private Businesses Act is weaker than the Charter of the French Language. So in Quebec, it would represent a step backwards. Applying it outside Quebec remains a good idea. It is the OQLF that has expertise in regulating private businesses. So the government should let the OQLF do its job.
Monsieur Rousseau, merci.
Thank you, Mr. Rousseau. We will start with the first round of questions, 6-minute round for every political party. The first turn will be the first vice chair of the Official Language Committee, Mr. Godin. You have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for being with us, to our two students, Ariel Wharton and Houston Rifai. I hope I pronounce your names correctly. So it is really interesting to see young people appearing before us to defend their convictions. That is impressive. So you will always be welcome in the realm of politics. My first question will be to Mr. Rousseau. Can you go into a bit more detail on one of the points you were making in your presentation? Because you had a comment saying there is an over-financing of post-secondary English-speaking institutions in Quebec. How do you explain that in concrete terms? What do you mean exactly in over-financing of post-secondary education institutions, Anglophone institutions in Quebec? Thank you very much. You referred to young people taking up the challenge. I would include myself as a young person as well in that comment, so thank you for that. So the problem with the bill is that the Anglophone minority of Quebec is being put on an equal footing with the Francophone minorities of other provinces, but the federal government clearly has to do more for Francophones of other provinces. So the principle of the symmetrical approach is a bit problematic. And when it comes to financing of research, there are different criteria that could be used when you look at the demographic weight of the Anglophone community in Quebec versus the Francophone communities in other provinces. We're not seeing the same thing. So that is one way of calculating this overfinancing. But even if you look at the number of McGill, Concordia, and Bishop universities or elsewhere, the financing of research through the major organisms that we know about, then again, McGill, Concordia, Bishop at a lower level maybe, but they have a lot more access to financing. And research affects our language of work at universities. We train the elites, as it were, scientists of the future. That is taking place more in English, so the government has to take steps, and we have to have a diversity of approaches in science, and we have to have multiple scientific languages, but English, of course, is dominant globally, and the federal government has a bit of a tendency to finance research in English in Quebec, which is not ideal. I will share with you my personal opinion. If we are talking about over-financing at the post-secondary Anglophone level in Quebec, I think this is an under-financing of post-secondary institutions or education elsewhere in Canada. So do we reduce the financing available to Anglophones in Quebec, or do we owe it ourselves to increase the financing for Francophones outside Quebec? I think we need to increase the financing for research in French in Quebec. Coming back to this territorial approach, we can finance research in French in other provinces. There are institutions doing an excellent job on that front, but when you look at the scientific literature, what functions is when you help the language where it's in a majority situation, you have a pool of students, a lot more people, you can carry out different workshops or different activities and create the critical mass and then attract the financing for the research. So more territorial approach, financing French research in Quebec more. In other provinces, we can go for the personality approach. So every researcher chooses their own language. If they choose French or other languages, they can do this, or they should have the option to do so. But when you look at the scientific literature, it's clear we have to defend French in Quebec. In research as well, what this means in research is increasing financing. If you increase financing for French research in French in Quebec without touching research in English, there will be a point of balance, because there's currently a bit of a difference between the two. So I have a very simple question. If you can quickly respond, that would be very much appreciated. In Bill C-13, what necessary tools do you think we should apply so that the next day we stop the decline of French in Canada as soon as this bill is enacted? Well, it's a bit of a challenge. Language politics is a bigger picture than a bill. There is a lot that can be done. But I will stop you. Are you able to identify 3 tools? As you say, it's a vast topic, but are you able to talk to us about 3 tools that could be prioritized to stop the decline of French as soon as C-13 is enacted? You have 40 seconds. Immigration policy, French-speaking immigration policy, that is very important in Quebec and in other provinces. And ideally, if the government of Quebec could have more powers when it comes to immigration, to have a coherent policy, immigration and integration, backed by a French-speaking federal immigration policy for other provinces. And also, in Quebec, the Charter of the French language should apply to the private enterprises, private companies, and federally regulated private businesses as well. And we should draw more inspiration from the Charter of the French language. Thank you, Mr. Godin. Mr. Godin, you will have another chance to come back to Mr. Rousseau. Maybe others will ask you questions as well, Mr. Rousseau, so you'll be able to go into a bit more detail. Ms. Latanzio, you have the floor for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to first of all thank our witnesses who are with us today.
With congratulating both Ms. Wharton and Mr. Rifai in delivering your opening speech, not only in English, but also in French. And I want to congratulate you on your bilingualism, as I believe that, being bilingual in this province of Quebec, which is where I'm from, and in this country is an atout, like they say. It's a strength. So welcome, and again, congratulations. So I'm going to address my questions to both of you, and feel free to jump in either one or both at the same time. Members of this committee, and I can vouch for myself, are very concerned with the vitality of the English and French linguistic minority communities in Canada, and the role that our government can play in terms of enhancing their vitality. So for each of you, what are the challenges faced by the English-speaking community in Quebec?
Thank you, Madame Latanzio, for your question. First, let me say that we understand the importance of protecting and promoting French, and we also deeply care about our land's Indigenous languages, which many of, unlike French, are in danger of extinction. But community vitality as a concept is more than language. It is about the health of a community and what it needs to survive. English-speaking Quebecers live in the only province where the use of their language is restricted by provincial law. This has consequences, and we don't feel welcome in our own province. Unemployment and economic security are major concerns for English-speaking Quebecers. There are so many opportunities for bilingual people outside of Quebec, but we ask that the federal government provide programs that help English speakers, bilingual or not, find meaningful careers in Quebec, because we would like to work in the province that we call home. I would also like to mention that we know our language is not threatened. The vitality of our community, however, is dwindling because of the focus Ottawa places on language preservation as the principal marker of vitality.
I'm sorry, Mrs. Wharton, can I just ask you to just slow it down a little bit?
Yes, sorry.
I'm taking notes, and I just want to make sure that the interpreters get the right information. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. I hope you're not going to penalize me on my time. So I just felt it. I just felt that it was necessary for me to jump in. Sorry about that.
I stopped the clock. I was just about to
Okay.
ask Mrs. Wharton to slow down a little bit. Go ahead.
Sorry. Thank you for letting me know. I would also like to mention that we know our language is not threatened. The vitality of our community, however, is dwindling because of the focus Ottawa places on language preservation as the principal marker of vitality. To live in Quebec as an English speaker is to experience a political environment where we are told that our existence is a threat to society, no matter what we do, no matter how bilingual or bicultural we are. We always feel like we are the other, the Anglos. So with that being said, I would like to invite Houston to answer if he has anything else to add.
Well, my colleague covered it very well, but I would like to mention that there was mention of the schooling system in Quebec, for example, where there's quite a few English universities. What is left out is that most students who are trained and in these schools actually leave the province, actually. So one of the big things in our community that we see is a lot of my colleagues and a lot of my friends, frankly, need to leave and have to leave. And I find myself being pulled to leave to Quebec as well. And this is something that is sort of left out of this conversation, that yes, the schooling system has a lot of students, but it creates this giant skills gap where the province pays to train us and we leave. Thank you.
So in essence, you're basically saying that there's a brain drain going on in Quebec.
That would be correct.
Okay. And in terms of, and I'm going to take you back to, some of the statements that were made, like the Bill 13 proposes to create this new language rights for the Francophone only with respect to their communications with federally regulated businesses. So as young English-speaking Quebecers, you're saying that you're feeling abandoned by the federal government in this proposal. How would you see what changes or amendments that you would like to see in C13 proposed to be able to address this concern?
Well, I think our statement was very specific to the factor of mentioning the French Language Act here in Quebec. So we don't believe that there should be any connection on this front because, frankly, the Language Act is notwithstanding. It exists notwithstanding the Charter of Rights. So making reference to it is not, for one thing, it sends the wrong message. For another thing, it leaves the door open for future legislation that would limit our language rights here in Quebec.
Okay, so when we started first studying this language law, we were at a time where Bill 96 had not been adopted as a law, and now in Quebec it is a law. So and that would be applying this new law, the Bill 96, to its society, notwithstanding the fundamental rights and freedoms of Quebecers. How does that make you feel, and what consequences do you think down the line as you are the youth, and I'm hoping that you're going to stay in Quebec and contribute to this beautiful province and country, but how do you feel the enactment of that law now being applicable to Quebec and vis-a-vis the bill, the proposed language law of Bill C13?
In 30 seconds.
I can say that we do feel like the language laws are dividing the two official language communities, that's for sure.
Would you be prevented in terms of the use of the notwithstanding clause to be able to address the courts who have always been there to be able for the minority communities to bring forward these injustices?
5 seconds.
Okay, well, we'll include that answer in our brief. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm quite severe with the time. I want to make sure that every colleagues can have all their time. So the next questions, les prochaines questions seront posées par le deuxième.
Next questions will be asked by the second vice chair of the Official Language Committee, Mr. Beaulieu. You have the floor for 6 minutes. Thank you. Thanks to all of our witnesses for appearing before us today. I have a question to Mr. Guillaume Dussault. So you talked about territoriality as the only way of ensuring the vitality of minority languages in Quebec. Well, in Canada, French is the language, but even in Quebec, we had, and I quote, you can be minority in the state and be protected by Article 27 of the International Civic Rights Pact, and Anglophone Canadian citizens cannot be considered as a linguistic minority. So can we then say that the Official Languages Act which is based on this concept that the Anglophones constitute a minority in Quebec, all of the financing, all of the services will go towards reinforcing English in Quebec, but is this against international law then? You referred to the Valentine decision, the United Nations Human Rights Committee. In terms of the international law, yes, there is reference to sovereign nations or countries. So yes, Canada, Anglophones all across Canada, including in Quebec, are the majority. So they're not considered as minorities with particular rights in that sense. So indeed, by considering Anglophones, the Anglo-Quebecers as minorities, in fact, they are part of the language majority in Canada. That goes against international law in that sense, yes. We often hear comparisons. If you do something for Francophones in Quebec, then that will have a negative impact on Francophones outside Quebec. It's always based on this asymmetrical approach, but I think both can be done at the same time, reinforce French inside and outside Quebec with the territorial model you mentioned. And I've often also heard the argument that the territorial model only applies to Quebec and that will damage or harm Quebecers outside of Quebec. But in places where you have a critical mass of French speakers, they try to make French their common language, so that might also help increase the assimilation rates. One thing we should always bear in mind is that if French is doing well in Quebec, that radiates outside of Quebec as well. So if there are plays, films being produced in Quebec, then Francophones from other provinces will have access to this as well. So Francophone artists from other provinces, the same applies to them as well. If they want to produce and sell their products, then the Quebec market becomes important for them because it has a sufficient number of Francophones. So from a social demographic point of view, we're talking about the same pool of or same group of interests, if you will. So we have to stop with this symmetrical approach, which goes to say that an improvement for French in other provinces will necessarily be a step down for French in Quebec. We really should put an end to this because that doesn't make sense politically, and that pits Francophones from other provinces to Francophones from Quebec. And someone was referring to an initiative by an initiative of the federal government where community groups are being financed, and there was talk of financing bilingual tools. Yes, it's symmetrical. It's the same in Quebec and other provinces, but in Quebec, these tools are being produced because people are bilingual, but in other provinces, that's not really the case. So it helps with promoting English in Quebec, but very little in terms of promoting French outside Quebec. So in real terms, yes, we have to do a lot more for French in other provinces and also in Quebec. So quickly, if I can, the government of Quebec has made a series of demands with regard to C13, but nothing has been accepted. They hit a wall. What do you think about that? Because we have we're under a lot of pressure to adopt C13 as quickly as possible. C13 has some interesting territoriality aspects to it. For instance, with regard to the use of French in private enterprises, that can apply to regions outside Quebec. That will be interesting, in my opinion. But at the same time, you have asymmetrical elements. It says French is being threatened everywhere in Canada, but then the following paragraph, yes, there are minorities on both sides, Anglo-Quebecers and Franco-Ontarians, for instance, being put on equal footing. So if the bill was a bit more frank and open when it comes to the asymmetrical aspect, it would be a bit more interesting. So that might only benefit Anglophone education institutions for the teaching of English. How do you think we can rectify the situation? Well, one of the concrete impacts that C13 might have is that right now the federal government finances a lot of groups defending Anglophones in Quebec and Francophones in other provinces, but we have to continue financing Anglophones and their rights in Quebec, but at the same time finance a lot more groups defending French in Quebec, because the emphasis was elsewhere. But as soon as you recognize that French is the mandatory language from one ocean to another, then the federal government has to help these groups out with cultural activities, with newcomers, etc. So the federal government has to finance such activities a bit more.
The next questions will come from Manitoba. Madame Ashton, over to you, 6 minutes. Thank you very much, and I would like to thank our witnesses.
Ms. Wharton and Mr. Rifai for their testimonies today, making points that are important for our all of us as MPs to hear as well. Appreciate you being with us here today. Mes questions.
My questions are for Mr. Rousseau. Early in the year, you came before the committee talking as part of our study on measures to protect French in Quebec and Canada. You spoke about the territoriality approach and compared it to the personality principle. C13 does have a certain territorial approach with certain measures being applied only in regions with a strong Francophone presence. What do you think of the idea of including certain measures in regulations rather than the bill itself? In general, I tend to prefer having measures written into the bill. This will allow for more democratic debates, greater flexibility. I do appreciate the flexibility that comes with regulations. But certain things should be written into the Act as well. Like the committees that look after French in private workplaces will need to determine the size of businesses, the size of committees, and that's a really fundamental issue. If it's only businesses with more than 200 people which have responsibilities, the bill won't have a great impact. If it's bills with 25 or more, rather businesses with 25 or more, that's a different story. There are public policy questions that are being passed on to the rulemaking process. There is a place for regulations, but currently I think the federal government is emphasizing this route too much. The government is also suggesting setting out immigration targets by regulation to stop the decline of French. Premier Legault has talked about stemming the decline of French in Quebec, but we know that the federal government is discriminating against African foreign students, placing obstacles in their path. This worsens the decline in French. Year after year, the federal government misses its own Francophone immigration targets. Do you think this justifies including a remedial target within the bill? The more that is written into the bill, the clearer the bill is, the more the government will be able to reach its objectives. Immigration is certainly one part of the solution, but the thing is, if you turn on the immigration tap, that's all very well and good. But if you don't plug the drain and Anglicization continues, it won't be too much. If Francophones who have been here since the 17th century assimilate into English, so will newcomers. So we do need to have realistic expectations. And action should be taken in the educational sphere to protect French. It's a question of vitality for French, but it goes beyond that. I am in the law faculty in Sherbrooke, so I'm going to plug my own faculty a bit. we recruit students throughout the Francophone world, from France, but also from French-speaking countries in Africa. If we if we accept a student from Africa and then they don't get their visa, that causes problems on our end. Each student contributes funding to the university, so especially more rural universities need foreign students to fund research in French. If the federal government is not giving quick access to visas to our students, because also there's a question of deadlines. If you apply in May and only get and school starts in September, you'll be in some trouble. It causes great problems. This is a very important issue, particularly for rural Quebec. You spoke about this a little bit, but could you talk about the advantages of defining certain priorities in the bill rather than in regulations? Well, first, there's the whole question of democracy, transparency, and participatory democracy. There were consultations on the bill, but the parliamentary process is much more open to stakeholders. As you can see at this committee, we've had experts before the committee. There are young people defending the rights of Anglophone Quebecers. So consultation is much more suited to the legislative process, not the rulemaking process. Then there's the whole question of flexibility. When measures are written into the bill, it can harm flexibility somewhat. Maybe what we should do is write certain measures into the bill, but also revise the bill every 5 or 10 years. I would suggest a revision every 5 years to line up with the census. Thank you, Mr. Russo. We will now begin our second round of questions. The first question will come from Mr. Liu and Mr. Godin, who will be sharing a 5-minute slot. Thank you, Chair. Question for Mr. Russo. You started an answer about Quebec's recommendations. I'd like to hear you be a little bit clearer on the particular character of Quebec. In Canada, language policy is based around the personality principle, and the personality principle is not well suited to ensure the survival of a vulnerable language. Quebec's language laws are based on territoriality. The more the federal government turns towards the personality principle and away from the territoriality principle used in Quebec, the more French will suffer. The federal government needs to use a territoriality principle, and it is moving in that direction somewhat due to the use of French and Federally Regulated Private Services Act. What I'm calling for is to give as much precedence as possible to the Quebec government. They have a set of consistent language laws. They have the OQLF and all its expertise. There needs to be consistency in language laws from kindergarten to the workplace. There should be a continuum of measures to protect French, and this requires consistency. The federal government is being somewhat inconsistent. Some parts are aligned with Bill 101 and some aren't, especially since Bill 101 was strengthened through Bill 96. Currently, Bill C-13 has one section on immigration. Is this measure sufficient, or is it really just a bit of window dressing? I'd like to hear you talk about that. As a legal specialist and as an expert in civil law, I like to see things codified. I'd like to see clear measures, and I'd like to see great guidance for the justice system. I would like the section on immigration be made more demanding. Unfortunately, case law has harmed the protection of French in Quebec. Does the language rights clause codify the recent Supreme Court decision? I don't have that before me right now. Okay, well, then I will ask another question. The FCFA has suggested a measure to ensure binding language clauses. They say this will make for more accountability. The whole question of FPT agreements with the provinces is important. Here, asymmetry is the right approach. The federal government should include language clauses and FPT agreements, agreements on childcare, for example. I know this is an issue important to Ms. Ashton. Meanwhile, in Quebec, the federal government should really get out of the way and let Quebec manage its own language laws, so an asymmetric approach. The Quebec government does work to protect French, but there are still certain rights for Anglophones. And really, it would be best for the federal government to focus on provinces other than Quebec. Thank you. This is music to my ears. 1 minute. Yes. When you talk about how regulations have a consultation process, but it's never as strong as the consultation process for a law, it's music to my ears. Regarding the 5-year revision, the bill is currently talking about a 10-year review, and it's not especially clear. So I'd like to propose a motion. I move that as part of the study on C13, given testimony from the commissioner that the Minister of Official Languages, the Minister of Canadian Heritage, and the President of the Treasury Board be invited to appear before the committee. Mr. Godin, I didn't quite get your last sentence. That they be invited for a meeting as soon as possible following October 18th. We know that ministers have busy schedules, but we really do need answers to our questions. Any questions regarding the motion? I have a point of order. I agree with the motion, but could we keep what time we have today to ask questions to our witnesses? Perhaps we could move the motion to the end. This is what the procedure says. A motion was moved in the middle of a committee meeting. It's a legitimate motion. It is on topic. Are there any questions about the motion? And please raise your hand because I can only see the entire room all at once. Mr. Jouen, I agree with the motion. But I would note that every party has already sent in a speakers list. So I hope we aren't just indefinitely extending these lists. I don't want to be passing Bill C-13 in April. If I may, I'm just a tad confused. Mr. Godin, I believe these witnesses have already been invited. Well, certainly, but we want to have them come before the committee as quickly as possible. We don't want to hear them at the end of the study. Oh, I see. I have no objection to that. Any objections? Please raise your hand. No objections? Okay, seeing none. The motion is passed unanimously. We will now move to the next 5-minute round with Mr. Drouin. Over to you. Thank you, Chair. I would like to thank all witnesses who are here with us in the room. It's great to see people in person, and also all of our witnesses reporting in via video chat. we haven't had a chance to ask many questions to our virtual witnesses, so I will be directing my questions to them. I'm Francophone, but I appreciate getting the chance to speak English. This is Canada, and we use two languages.
You guys are just with C13. What's the most important aspect of this that you do want to see on C13?
I would say that the most important aspect for like the positive aspects of the legislation, obviously, is to promote the language, the French language in the rest of Canada, where, frankly, the French language is in decline for two major factors, right? It's lack of immigration to Quebec because of very strong limits to immigration to Quebec, and also because of the loss of language of Francophone communities outside of Quebec. Those are clearly the two factors, one of which is a matter for the province of Quebec to deal with. Another one is the federal government should be having a laser focus on making sure that Francophone communities outside of Quebec have as much resources and as much help as possible to maintain their languages. But this cannot come at the cost, frankly, which is our entire discussion here. This cannot come at the cost of language minorities here in Quebec as well, because frankly, it is already a very heavily regulated system here. The reality is as such. And we don't want to see the Charter of the French language to be reflected in the Official Languages Act, frankly. That's our big takeaway, if you would like one aspect of this.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Et maintenant en présentiel.
Now turning to Mr. Rousseau in the room with us. This is not the first time you came before the committee to talk about territoriality, which is quite hard to pronounce. On that topic, both outside and even inside Quebec, because we have Quebecers from other provinces, Francophone communities are spreading out and changing. It used to be that you would never find Francophones in Western Ottawa. Now it's completely different. So how can you apply the territoriality principle, and how can we strengthen C13 to serve Francophone communities that are becoming increasingly dispersed? Another point. Many young people don't identify with a region. They identify with their phones. How could we ensure that there is Francophone content made available in an environment without the geographical limits? Thank you very much for that question. Yes, I did come before the committee before. You asked me some questions, and your questions allowed me to clarify my own thoughts. It was a very enriching exercise for me. I talked about the territoriality principle, which has the unanimous support, practically, of scientific research. Your questions have allowed me to clear up my thinking. Now I can more clearly talk about the differences between Quebec and regions of strong Francophone presence outside Quebec, like New Brunswick, parts of Ontario, Ottawa. That's where so territoriality should be applied in Quebec, but outside Quebec, the personality principle can still apply. It has its limits. When one language is stronger than another and people are allowed to choose, they will tend to choose the stronger language, i.e. English. The personality principle cannot save a language in and of itself. It can't work miracles. But you cannot apply the territoriality principle in an area where one language represents only a small minority. Outside Quebec, the personality principle is entirely legitimate. So everywhere outside Quebec, and maybe some bordering regions with many Francophones. Here, I have a respectful disagreement with the other witnesses. I believe it is very important to mention the Charter of the French language in the bill. The notwithstanding clause does not suppress rights. It gives more rights to legislators. All right. Sorry to our interpreters. Things are going very quickly today. Mr. Beaulieu, 2 minutes 30. The Quebec government, or rather the federal government, is mostly elected by Anglophone voters. Anglophone Canada has imposed a constitution on Quebec which weakens its language laws. Does imposing federal principles on Quebec not constitute a lack of respect for Quebec? Is it not showing a lack of respect for the principle of self-determination? Interesting question. When you talk about the right to self-determination, you need to be careful, because there's external self-determination, i.e. succession, and then internal self-determination, i.e. Autonomy or an autonomous zone within a federated country. So I think we're talking more about internal self-determination. But the idea that there is a constitution that was passed by other provinces but not Quebec does seem to harm internal self-determination, especially given that this constitution weakens protections for French in Quebec. That's why the notwithstanding clause is important. Since Canadian constitutions have been in place, the justice system has had a great deal of influence over language laws in Quebec, and over the years they have weakened protections for French. Now with the census we see the results. If right now judges seem to have more power than legislators, and a balance needs to be struck, one that protects the rights of Francophones and Anglophones. But if the current system worked, we would know. The census would be showing different numbers. The current system is not working. We need to review the system, give more power to the legislator in Quebec. In theory, yeah, it makes sense to have the justice system as a neutral party, but in reality, we're seeing that this has really damaged the French language. Sorry, that's all the time we have, Mr. Beaulieu. I know 2 minutes and 30 passed quickly. Over to you, Ms. Ashton. Thank you very much. Mr. Rousseau, you were starting to talk about 3 elements that should be included in Bill C-13 to protect the French language. First, you talked about immigration. If the federal government was doing a better job, for example, accepting study permits from African students, or if the federal government had better consular services in Quebec, in Africa, would this not stem the decline of French in Quebec? These are very important issues. Francophone immigration is hugely important. It will allow the federal government to increase the proportion of Francophones. The thing is, if you have Francophone immigration, but at the same time Francophones are anglicizing, then Francophone immigration will not solve your problem. So Francophone immigration should be treated as just a part of the solution. It should not be treated as some kind of cure-all. If we direct all our efforts towards immigration, it won't solve the problem, because all these Francophone immigrants will be anglicized, whether they are newcomers or Quebecers or Francophones who have been in the country for generations. You need to burn the candle at both ends. But of course, Francophone immigration is very important. Franco-Manitobans and Franco-Ontarians are often bilingual, but this does not mean that they don't live in French. What this does mean is that they require more Francophone immigration and more funds for integration. You have talked about how Francophone immigration will not stem the decline. Communities are saying the opposite. Why do you disagree with communities?
Segunda.
You have 30 seconds. It can help slow the decline, let's put it this way. But if French speakers are being anglicized, this will impact Francophones coming through immigration. Yes, that will help slow the decline, but we don't only want to slow it down, we want to reverse it. So it takes other elements other than immigration. Thank you, Mr. Rousseau. I would like to thank all of our witnesses, Mr. Rifai, Ms. Horton.
Else should have been mentioned by yourselves. Please provide us any more extra information to via our clerk, and she will provide that to all the members of this committee. Monsieur Rousseau, même chose pour vous. Si vous pensez, je sais.
Mr. Rousseau, the same applies to you. I know that you have a lot more to share with us. We have very passionate young witnesses as well, but the same applies to you. If you think there's more information you can provide to our committee, you can, of course, submit that in writing to our clerk, who will share the information with us. So thank you very much. Thanks to the members of our committee. And with that, we went beyond our allocated time. So sorry to the technicians. Now we adjourn the meeting.